Imagine waking up one morning to find your city's power cut, the water supply contaminated, your bank account inaccessible, and the supermarket shelves empty. Not due to warplanes or tanks, but because of an invisible, silent strike launched through the internet. Back in 2012, US Defense Secretary Leon Panetta predicted an attack that would paralyze and shock the nation, not through military means, but via a cyber attack, which, perpetrated by nation states or violent extremist groups, could be as destructive as the terrorist attacks of 9/11. They could, he said, contaminate the water supply in major cities or shut down the power grid across large parts of the country. His words marked a turning point, a new era of cyber warfare where the battlefield is now digital. Countries and corporations have since begun to confront a sobering reality. The next major conflict may be fought with code, not bullets. Hackers, no longer isolated or amateurish, are highly coordinated and often backed by powerful nation states. They shift from sector to sector, using artificial intelligence to identify and exploit vulnerabilities. Hospitals, universities, supermarkets, nothing is off limits. Just last year, UK education institutions were targeted, and now high street retailers like Co-op and M&S have joined the growing list. Is this just another wave of disruption or a prelude to something much more catastrophic? While defenders deploy the same AI tools to detect and patch vulnerabilities, they're locked in an arms race with adversaries who have the advantage of anonymity, state protection, and global reach. How can we protect ourselves when many of these cyber criminals operate from jurisdictions beyond the reach of Western law enforcement? And there are signs that something's happening behind the scenes. Within the last few days, it was announced that the UK MOD is to spend an extra $1 billion on defence, a significant proportion of that on cyber. All worrying signs. There is hope, however. In a rare example of international cooperation, police forces from Britain, the US, Germany, France and others recently dismantled a major Russian-led malware network. Arrest warrants have been issued, indictments have been unsealed, but is this enough? Today, we ask the crucial questions. Are we prepared for the big one? Can our lawyers and systems and keep up with the criminals and the cyber threats? And how do we protect ourselves in a world where the next devastating attack might arrive not by land, air or sea, but simply through a click? To discuss all of this, I am joined today by my Tech TV colleague Pete Warren and by Gary Cox, Senior Technical Manager for UK and Ireland at Infoblox. Over to you, Pete.
Gary, you've done a lot of work with the government. What's going on at the moment? Our high street's being attacked. The government's being attacked. There's been attacks on the NHS within the last week. There's been attacks on the court system. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Pete, I don't know if I can comment exactly on what's going on, other than that the government is no different to any other enterprise. I think we should all assume that we are going to be under attack all of the time. We all need to shift to a state of readiness and preparation. Like I said, governments are no different. Government departments are no different. NHS is no different. The importance of those organizations, they all need to, and we all need to focus on our cyber hygiene generally. There's a lot of great defenders inside all of those organizations who are doing good jobs, but we can all do more.
But it's an interesting point, isn't it? A year ago, I was in Panama. I bumped into some people, completely coincidentally, from the US State Department. I said to them, we appear to be in a cyber war. This cyber war has been going on for far longer than the Ukrainian conflict. Why are people remorselessly attacking computer systems?
in many ways, it's a faceless crime. I mean, if we think back, bank robbers used to go in with sawn-off shotguns in a van, waiting outside to do their getaway, right? But then you were caught. Everyone knew who you were, and you'd go to prison. With computers, with the internet, now cybercrime and indeed cyber warfare can be conducted at great distance. I mean, arm's length and then some, right? So yeah, it's a difficult one to get to attribution of the criminal, and I think that anonymity is why it's so prevalent, at least from a criminal perspective.
Why do we have this anonymity? We're seeing Europol beginning to strip this back with certain gangs. We're seeing Interpol as well becoming involved. We're seeing cooperation between police forces in the US and Europe in bringing these gangs down. So attribution is possible. Why is it so difficult? Is it because some people won't let us into their networks to find out where the attacks are coming from?
I don't know if it's so much that people won't let people into the networks, and I think you've actually hit the nail on the head. It's that cooperation, cross-jurisdictional, is what really will lead to people being identified and prosecuted. Probably none of us have the full picture, which is why an individual agency, it's really difficult for them to go and find the criminal and get them. But the second you start to join the dots together, to cooperate, to track it at a global scale, I think this is where we start to see benefits. I mean, if I just look at things that happen, for example, here inside the United Kingdom, people like the Cyber Defence Alliance. So the Cyber Defence Alliance are joining together law enforcement and all of, many of our banks, our retail banks. And they're doing it for the greater good. It's to make sure that, again, you've got that triangulation between different entities working together for a common cause.
So in that case, then, can we identify where these lines of cooperation break down? If we're seeing cooperation between European police forces and American police forces, we may not be seeing cooperation between those forces of law and order and Russian police forces. We may not be seeing that cooperation between those forces, Chinese forces, North Korean forces. Is that a fair thing to actually say?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, quite honestly, Pete. I'm not in those inner circles to know who does talk to who and when and where. I'm sure there are communications where appropriate, but again, I wouldn't even like to step on that one.
I mean, I'm just pushing for this question of attribution. I mean, one of the things that seems to be happening at the moment is many times. I wrote a book in 2005 warning of this situation. Obviously, it was such a well-bought book that nobody heeded it. But the point is, at that time, people were talking about this being a Wild West. This is more than a Wild West. We've got gangs just, riding up the metaphorical internet high street on their horses, just shooting. And we don't appear to be doing very much about it, apart from saying, oh, we'd better put some stuff across the windows and make sure that the walls are bulletproof. Surely we do need some other solutions to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things that we can all do is come back to some foundational basics. Things like making sure that our attack surface is known, and when I say attack surface, it's internal and external. If I've got, let's say, a bunch of Microsoft servers, let's make sure those are patched. If those Microsoft servers are running critical services, can I decouple them? So maybe move my DNS onto something else. So again, I'm spreading that. Make sure that we know, what does our internet presence look like online? And that could be, what are my employees sharing on the likes of LinkedIn or indeed any other social media? And what does my company footprint look like? If from the outside in, if someone's scanning, which they shouldn't do, but they can do, it's an external internet presence, right? What does that attack surface look like? Is it easy to map out where are my easy points of entries? And certainly, I mean, the area that the company that I work for specializes in, we're able to look at some of those things, and it could be something as simple as being able to see, does a company use DocuSign? If a company uses DocuSign, well, if I'm the bad actor, that is just one thing I could look at to say, well, if I wanted to do a phishing campaign against these folks, that's one piece of the puzzle where maybe I'm going to use DocuSign, or indeed anything else. So I think if we are aware of our attack surface, we can start to batten the hatches down where appropriate, and that includes training our users to say, hey, if this is what corporate standards look like. If you see something that deviates from it, then be wary. And I say that's good cyber hygiene. It goes far beyond that, of course. There are
Gary, what you seem to be saying is that modern businesses aren't modern. What you're saying is that modern businesses are still very 20th century. They're not even 21st century. They're not able to visualize themselves on the internet or in an IT world, and they're not actually able to visualize what those threats are to that. You seem to be talking to me about a world where people can't actually see what they look like.
So I think they can if they choose to go looking. I think it's a question of going and doing that due diligence, understanding what your presence of your company or yourself as an individual looks like on the internet. How much of a risk am I? What processes do I have in place? Are people using, two-factor authentication, for example? If you're not, that's absolutely a foundational thing that should be put in place. So it's all of these sort of checks and balances that I think give us good cyber hygiene. You mentioned UK government earlier. So if we look at things like Cyber Essentials Plus, that is the UK government or the NCSC starting to put in place frameworks for companies inside the UK to get to a baseline standard. Now, of course, it's not mandated and it's very difficult to do that. But that is, again, it's a good way of starting to make sure that I've got those checks and balances in place. I'm getting to at least a baseline. And the baseline still might not be good enough. It really might not, okay? Our adversaries, we should be respectful of them and they collaborate far more than perhaps we as defenders do, which is really scary. But yeah, that baseline at least is a starting point.
But that baseline, with all due respect, it reminds me very much of the Green Cross Code Man that we used to see. It is almost that basic, and that does actually go to a little bit of an irony that even then that you were trying to tell people how to cross a road, and we're in a similar situation now with the cyber high street. That Green Cross Code Man attitude, we have to radically up, because small and medium-sized businesses are now coming under attack, and they're the ones who are least able to defend themselves currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that as a premise. I think we all need to start somewhere. So as you rightly said, the Green Cross Code Man, that's a great analogy for it. It's trying to teach people those foundations. Some will listen, some won't. Some will be careful and look both ways before they're crossing. Others won't. And I think you're right as well. The SMBs, the smaller companies who don't have any budget for cyber, or a CISO, someone to guide them through the choppy waters, who's qualified, has experience in doing this. There are some great organizations out there that try their hardest to support people like those smaller organizations, whether they be local sort of cyber clusters or people like ISC Squared, B-Sides. They all try and do the sort of community education piece. Could there be more? There can always be more. And I think I'm a huge advocate for making sure that anyone, whether it's a relative, friend, family member, small company, has somewhere to go to get quality advice.
But that also argues that we should have people who are on the boards of companies who actually do know what they're talking about in terms of technology. This is something that we're beginning to see mandated in the US for large companies. The Fed in the US is making sure this is mandatory. With the resilience measures that are being proposed by the EU and will be probably replicated in the UK, those are things that we need to see too, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, certainly there are some excellent CISOs out there that I know who look after very large organizations, and they do a fantastic job. Not every company in the UK has a CISO. For some, it won't be appropriate. But I think if I'm sort of cutting to the chase there, certainly whether you're labeled as a CISO or you're not, but if you're responsible for the technology inside an organization, whether that's just a website and an email address, for really small companies, I think we need to be tech savvy. We need to be tech savvy to know, well, what should I be doing as a best practice? And it comes down to education.
But and yet we're also now moving into this AI world where people are seeking to deploy AI as quickly as possible, even though they don't understand the cybersecurity. AI is data hungry, so if your data's poisoned, you're in a very, very bad situation. We're also going to have a supply chain nightmare. Bill, in his introduction, was talking about the possibility of the one big attack. Well, the one big attack could quite likely just be a catastrophic accident unless we get on top of all of this.
Yeah, AI is it's interesting. It's a blessing and a curse in equal measure. And the reason I phrase it that way is certainly all of us can use it for the greater good. Those small companies, they can absolutely use ChatGPT or indeed any other to say, hey, look, this is the profile of my company. How could I best defend myself? What are the basics I should do? And check, trust but verify, right? But it'll give you the starting point of what does the start of good look like? Then on the inverse, we have our bad actors using AI to accelerate their timelines, to do things faster, quicker, easier, better. I remember one of the very first things that I personally tried with AI, and perhaps being a techie security geek, this was naturally the first thing I did. I wrote a phishing email, which I fortunately was never going to send, and said, translate this into Russian. Now translate it into French. Now translate. I don't speak any of those languages. And it did a fantastic job. So that's just an example of how easy AI tooling can make it, whether we go down the line of, deep fakes and all that stuff, but just the rudimentary stuff. It makes it really easy for the bad actors to create campaigns, to weaponize, to deliver those campaigns and do it en masse at scale.
I think that's a very important lesson, isn't it? The very important lesson to think about with all of this is people talk about AI attacks. What they're actually not realizing is that an AI attack could be just using the technology to actually take advantage of existing weaknesses. So, for example, you mentioned the fact that on social media, people give out an incredible amount of information about themselves. The intelligence agencies call that open source intelligence. Right. You can find lots and lots and lots of detail about people's lives on that. You can actually tell a AI engine to go through a social media profile, find out all about them and base an attack on that. And you could just tell them to do that, couldn't you? We're not talking about sophisticated coding.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think, those of us that will succeed in an AI world will be those that get the prompts down to a fine art. Like, know what you're looking for, know how to iterate through that in order to get the best out of it, using the right AI tooling, the right AI engines to go and really get the right data that you want, and then validate it, verify it, of course. But yeah, it's all about the expediency. And as you rightly say, absolutely tell it, hey, go to LinkedIn and look up Peter Warren for it. Please tell me all the books he's written and articles it'll come back in a flash.
I'm not sure it could do that. That's a huge volume of data.
AI is there for big data problems, Pete.
But that's the point, isn't it? And that's the point that we've got to come to terms with. We're moving into, I mean, a lot of people, we used to use the term 21st century to talk about the future. We're now in the 21st century and we're talking about a 22nd century. We're not actually properly prepared for this 21st century world. We need to significantly educate people in all of this. A lot of people will say, a lot of the chief executives of small businesses will say, I don't have time for this. I actually make tables. I just want to concentrate on making tables. How do I protect myself? So how do they protect themselves? Do they buy in a service from somebody else? Do they go to Microsoft and say, we want you to run this and make sure that we're all safe so I can just carry on and concentrate on making tables? Or do they have to have some awareness of this world?
So yeah, there's something that we always talk about called the cyber maturity curve. And I think it's really good to know where you are on that cyber maturity curve. And you talk about buying in services. I think that is a fantastic starting point. Like if people are honest with themselves and say, hey, I know how to operate my email and do all my Word documents or my Google Docs or whatever, but I don't know anything about cyber. I don't know where to start with that. And they probably don't have a team of people to run a security operations center. So yes, absolutely, outsource that. It's going to be the quickest way to start on that cyber maturity journey. As companies scale up and they start to have in-house teams, then of course, then you can start to look at either hybridizing or going fully in-house. But I mean, it's it's a really, really hard thing, and companies need to choose what's the right model for them. I'm always, in favor of sort of hybridizing that world, because you can absolutely buy in the skills you need if you don't have them in house, rather than languish without them and put yourself at risk. However, your own staff inside your organization, they know your organization better than anyone else ever could, one would hope. So I think the blending of those two worlds can be so powerful.
You seem to be suggesting that there's possibly a role for government here in actually saying not just that there is cyber essentials, but also in terms of giving advice on the attacks that are coming, saying to businesses, this is the information that you need to be available, that needs to be available to you. This is where you can go to get additional information. Do you think that we need that information resource so that we can say to businesses, yeah, be cyber ready?
I think we already have that. I mean, if I look at publications from NCSC, if I look at publications in the US from NIST and CISA and various others, I think it's out there. I mean, I think.
But in that case, if it's out there, then how do we disseminate that? Do we actually go round to the parish councils and say, hey, make sure all of the businesses in your area know this, the county councils, the district councils?
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge, isn't it? It's how do you make sure the information is in the hearts and minds of the right people. Other than being an advocate in your own community, I honestly don't know. I mean, I mentioned earlier things like ISC2 chapters or various different cyber clusters that we've got up and down the UK. They're a fantastic starting point because they tend to be in their communities for their communities. That's a good starting point. But as I think we've said a couple of times, not everyone is a member of those. That information doesn't reach every single one in the population. I mean, maybe quite honestly, perhaps the best thing that the government or anyone else could do for us is a media campaign, is to get it out there. I mean, you mentioned the Green Cross Code one earlier. That was on TV. I don't think I've seen a TV campaign, talking about cyber essentials or anything else. So, I mean, we need to find a way of getting it to the masses. And maybe it's not a TV campaign nowadays. Maybe it's an online social media campaign. Wherever it's going to reach the right people, that's where it should go.
Gary Cox, next week it's InfoSec, the annual bean feast of the cybersecurity world. It's also a European cybercrime conference as well on what we've got to do to confront cybercrime. Gary, thank you very much. Gary Cox of Infoblox.
Thank you very much.
And Gary, thank you very much there. Thank you for joining us. I think, Pete, a lot of it comes down to two major focus areas, both the technical side and the political side. And we talked a lot there about training and the need for education. It is the reality, however, that specialist education, specialist skills are in very short supply. And that's why we're seeing the rise of things like managed security service providers. But on the political side, we also have to face reality here. Every country is a signatory to the UN agreement around law enforcement and collaboration. So, in theory, we should be able to ask Russia or China or North Korea to help us to track down these miscreants. But the reality is that all too often they are state-backed organizations, and it's these states that are backing them. And therefore, it will take a change in politics and a completely different role for the UN, its mandate, and everything else for us to make that difference. So, in the meantime, I think relying on the skills is going to be essential. I hope you agree.
Well, Bill, I actually think that, the statistics, according to the companies who will be talking at InfoSec next week, they claim that, and probably with much more authority than me, that 80% of the attacks come from nation state actors in some shape or form. If that's the case, then really all that you can do is make sure that you're protected until you can actually get an agreement from all of these nation states that what they're doing is going to eventually become very, very dangerous. Because one of the things that people talk about ad nauseum in the technology world is about an ecosystem. We are all now reliant on this information sphere, for want of a better phrase, and that's what we're potentially jeopardizing with some of these attacks. Sometimes the attacks are not particularly well coordinated. If you look at the NotPetya one, for example, that attacked a lot of things that it wasn't intended to go for. It nearly took out the shipping line. I forget the name of it, Maersk. Yeah, exactly. And that wasn't its intended victim. However, that was nearly its biggest casualty. So you've got to be very, very careful about what's going on in this.
Well, hopefully we'll see a lot more technology, a lot more advice, some great new tools at InfoSec next week. I want to thank Gary for joining us today, and I hope that in the near future we'll see great progress, not just on the technical side, but I'm ever the optimist. I hope that the political side and the collaboration through the UN or otherwise will help at some point crack down on some of these international actors and the fact that they're effectively operating from a safe haven at this moment in time. Anyway, thank you, everyone, and do tune in again soon, and hopefully we'll be bringing you more updates on this and many other similar topics.